If you're a fan of watching an artist pursue excellence in their craft and a singularity in their vision, you are in for a treat with today's film. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, wow, do we have a heck of a film for you today. The documentary Zappa, which is written and directed by Alex Winter. It really blew me away. There's no other way to say it. And you'll see my enthusiasm for it during the interview. And, I almost wish we had more time because there was so much to go over, but we got a lot in for the time that we had. The most important thing to stress, and I hope you hear me on this, you do not need to be a long-term fan of Frank Zappa's work to watch, enjoy, and understand this film. You just need to be a fan of artistry, the creative process, music, and even filmmaking, because that's what you get in this documentary. And satisfying the goal of a documentary, which is to inform its audiences while entertaining them, Alex Winter succeeded on every single level with his team to bring this extraordinary work to life. There's a million ways it could have gone wrong, but I think what's key here is that they had a really deep archive to draw from. With that in mind, they were still able to paint a portrait not only of Zappa, but also his creative theories, the art that was important to him in his life, how he handled failures, how he wouldn't give up. That's all there. So don't set this one on the side just because you say to yourself, "Oh, I've never heard of all of Frank Zappa's music. I'm going to miss the references," or you've never heard any of it. It doesn't really matter, because I was familiar with Frank Zappa before seeing this movie, but there were directions that it takes in the third act that it actually teases all along of some of his artistic interests that I never knew about, that are so impressive and so cool to just see unfold in this film, that it's an excellent documentary. Like I couldn't be happier with it. And, we talk about it a little in the documentary. They had such a wealth of footage and knew what to do with it, right? Sometimes documentaries do not know what to do with it. They knew what to do with it. That I could only liken some of the editing styles sometimes to like the great editing of Oliver Stone's JFK, because they were interspersing so many different media forms into one film from the wealth of what they had to deal with of Zappa's work. And the joke is, as great as this documentary is, at 2 hours and 7 minutes, as I say this later, you could argue that it's short and there's like more material that you would love to see. And I actually hope and expect the Zappa family in the future to release more of his work via maybe documentaries like this, maybe a series, or maybe just some of these lost broadcasts that you see for the first time in some cases here, because it's really fascinating. It's just cool to watch. So I highly, highly recommend you check out Zappa. I was very happy to have Alex Winter with us to talk about his creative process. He had such a thoughtful approach to this. It is no surprise that he was able to win over the Zappa family to become the director of this film when so many before him had tried and failed. So, and he was great about speaking about his creative process as well. So I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I published Backstory Magazine. We're having a blast during the pandemic with no movies in theaters really to speak of here in America. And, the release schedule has just been crazy. And it's been crazy to follow as a journalist. And, I'm proud to say that our team came together and we have a really cool issue 42 coming together for you. And then we're going to go right into issue 43, and we're going to keep putting new articles into the currently published issue 42 once we publish it, as new movies come out and TV shows, even though they might be intended for 43, because it seems like the release slate, although it was stagnant over the summer, has really come back. So there's going to be a lot for you to read in Backstory Magazine. It's the place that you could read screenplays in their entirety, along with interviews with filmmakers, plus just regular interviews with writers, novelists, graphic novel writers, musicians, producers, editors, actors. We've got so much going on in Backstory. If you've never read us, make sure to check out our free issue over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop, or of course through our iPad app Backstory. And you could save $5 by using the code SAVE5 over at backstory.net, and your credentials will work for you in other places as well. So your support means everything to us. We know we have a lot of podcast listeners. We know some of you have read the free issue over the years and not subscribed. Now would be the time to subscribe. It would really mean a lot to the artists, to the writers and the editors and my art director, everybody at the magazine. Having your support during the holiday season as we get ready to put out an issue and then go straight into another issue would be incredible. So thanks for considering. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our conversation with writer-director Alex Winter to chat about his latest film, Zappa. Okay, Alex, good to see you. How's it going, man?
It's going really well. It's good to be here.
Awesome. Great to have you. Well, so, we're going to give our listeners and viewers on YouTube and Spotify and iTunes just kind of like a snapshot of you as an artist before we get into Zappa, which we will get into because I absolutely loved it.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah, hell of an accomplishment. It's just a great film. So much to talk about. But a lot of people don't know, or some people know, that you went to NYU. You studied film. Mm-hmm. What did you get out of your film school experience that kind of has helped guide you?
Well, like a lot of people who like to noodle with film, I started really young as a kid, and I was acting as a kid professionally. And I ended up putting myself through film school with the money I made acting on Broadway. Sorry
to interrupt. What were you in on Broadway?
I was in King and I with Yul Brynner, and I was in Peter Pan with Sandy Duncan. I was on Broadway for years. It was 2 long-running shows back to back. So that made up most of my middle and high school years, were 8 shows a week.
Wow.
Which was great and a lot of fun, and also paid for college, which was nice. So, but I had a pretty specific agenda going into NYU. I was very interested in studying writing and directing. I did a lot of editorial study as well. Did a lot of editing there. And the way NYU was structured, it was still similar, even though everything's digital. And I was, of course, in the dinosaur age of analog. As you did everything. So you would work on other people's films in different crew areas. But I had a strong focus on screenwriting because I knew that story is where everything lived. And so it's funny because now that I'm out of film school, and because there's such a focus, I think, on autodidacticism and this kind of sometimes a kind of cultural disparagement of film school, I actually got an enormous amount out of it. I went for writing and I focused on screenwriting, and I did nothing but make films all day, every day in all these different areas. So when I got out, I was really ready to work, and I moved to LA after film school. And while I was acting, I was directing music videos and commercials and short films, and pretty much started right out of the gate out of school.
Your first film set that I saw that you were acting on was Death Wish 3. What was your favorite memory from that?
That was a really fun shoot. It was very crazy, though. Michael Winner was really a trip to work with. Bronson was actually very genteel, very nice, and very respectful of everyone. And of course, we had huge admiration for Bronson. But Winner was a maniac, and it was sort of like a crazy 80s set with a crazy director, and he was always trying to kill everybody, and it got really strange. And it was like, I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, The Stuntman, but
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Peter O'Toole is basically playing Michael. In fact, I'm pretty sure he is playing Michael Winner, but that's what it was like on steroids. So it was very disorienting and destabilizing, but I was young, so I found it amusing and entertaining.
You were also
the experience was great. There was a lot of actually really high-end crew on that film shooting it and working.
It's a crazy film. I mean, it is all over the place, but like in a good way. Like it's really out there. You were also on Lost Boys, mm-hmm. and I'm just curious what like a favorite memory from Lost Boys was, because were you there for the oiled up saxophonist?
I was. In fact, not only was I there, but I knew Tim before the Lost Boys. Tim Capello, who was in that scene, had a punk band in New York called the Ken Dolls, where they were all dressed like Ken dolls. And I used to see them play at CBGB's. So it blew his mind that I actually knew his career oiled up sax player who would go on to play for Tina Turner and all this other stuff. But look, Joel Schumacher was absolutely amazing. I was really grateful to be in it. I was cast by Marion Doherty, who's a legend. It was a really I got to sort of do King and I on Broadway at the tail end of a certain era on Broadway. I did Peter Pan as well, but it was really working with Yule as like my first really big job was like, we would have Richard Rodgers backstage and Lucille Ball and I was a big film fan, and theater fan. So I really appreciated that. And Lost Boys was a similar experience because it was kind of like coming in at the tail end of a certain era of Hollywood, and I would never experience it again because it was kind of over by the early 90s. But working with Joel and Richard Donner on this big, grand, fun, silly, crazy movie, it was a really special experience.
What was your worst audition as an actor, and the one that haunts you to this day? Because it can be tough to go out on auditions, and I'm just curious if you had one that was like really kind of haywire.
I never really look, when you start acting as a kid, you get so conditioned to just doing auditions and not worrying about it. And so it ended up just becoming like play for me. Like you would just show up and it would be a chance to act. You would just show up and act and not worry if you got it. I mean, honestly, Bill and Ted was like that. We saw those videos recently that went online. Keanu and I were laughing about it of our Bill and Ted auditions. And we don't remember coming into the audition with that much of the characters already in our heads. But clearly I was just having a good time and didn't really care. I probably had 4 auditions that day. So I wasn't like stressing about whether I got the part or not. I was assuming I probably wouldn't get it, and I was just going for it. I think one of the funniest auditions I ever had was for Oliver Stone I think it was on Born on the 4th of July. And I was a pretty well-known actor by then. And he literally, I think it was the only time I auditioned for someone. I'm auditioning for the director. It's not even for the casting director, right? Like it's really, usually like almost more of a conversation than I'm going to now read. And he literally did not get off the phone or look up at me from his desk it was like something out of a Christopher Guest movie.
That's terrible.
I think I might have just walked out in the middle, this is really not like a complete waste of my time. But other than that, they're usually pretty fun and relatively painless.
Bill and Ted's, obviously we have to talk about it. I swear we're still going to get to Zappa. But it was a life-changing role. What would you say was the biggest lesson of really being thrown into the lead of your first movie like that? You handled it great. Ed Solomon's screenplay was fantastic. And, tell me what your biggest lesson walking away from that was.
I think that, honestly, I had been doing co-starring roles on Broadway, and so I had gotten over the kind of I'm a lead jitters. It was a very small movie. It was an independent movie. Everyone was really young. The writers were young. Steve Herrick, the director, was really young. The producer, Scott Krupp, all of us were green, like not green so much as naive and just going for it, right? We didn't have a big studio looking over our shoulder. We didn't have a lot of money. So I didn't honestly feel a lot of pressure. And I think that's what helped the movie work, is that Keanu and I just kind of had fun and just took it seriously and played the characters straight and didn't try to make them arch. The writers, the director, everybody was just kind of going for it and having a good time. And I think it was infectious. And we didn't know that. We had no hubris about that movie. And the movie was shelved for a year. We didn't even think anyone was ever going to see it.
Right.
So
that's always the strangest part of the story, that they would even bother shelving that. Like, studios used to just dump things when they didn't like them. I never understood that part of the story. Like,
well, in our case, we didn't have a studio. I mean, we were made by Dino De Laurentiis, so we had, obviously a financier and an entity. But Dino bankrupted that company. He would bankrupt a company like it was like milk, and so we just didn't have a distributor. It wasn't like Warner Brothers tested it and didn't like it. There was no Warner Brothers. So we just sat on a shelf until Nelson Entertainment, this very small company, came along and said, "Oh, what's that?" And they bought it for an unbelievably small amount of money and tested it, and it went absolutely through the roof in testing.
So obviously getting back to film school and your filmmaking career, you met Tom Stern, who you collaborated a lot with in film school. And there's something that I've read about, like that you guys worked on something called Squeak of Death, which was a project that you were then working with Sam Raimi about. And I'm just curious what the project was, and does it still exist?
Sure. Yeah, A Squeal of Death was supposed to be our sophomore film. Tom Stern is a filmmaker who I met day one at NYU, literally in registration at NYU. We became very close friends. By the end of freshman year, we were directing together as a team, and we directed professionally for almost a decade.
Right.
Music videos. We had our show, The Idiot Box, on MTV,
Which I love.
Oh, thank you. And then the Freaked was the feature that we made for Fox, and Squeal of Death was our sophomore year film project, but he and I were pretty mercenary. We were not wealthy, so we had limited resources. We had a very epic idea for a movie in our heads, but there was no way we were going to finish it in time to deliver as our sophomore project. So we just kind of took the F and kept going. We finished it about halfway through our junior year. I was literally doing ADR on it in my hotel room while I was shooting Lost Boys. And it did incredibly well. It ended up on cable TV on a program called Night Flight on the USA Network, and it caught Sam Raimi's eye. And Sam Raimi said, "If you guys have movies that or other things you want to do, I'd like to help you produce them." And he never got anything of ours off the ground, but our mentorship with Sam was like our first 2 years in Hollywood, and it was really helpful. It was him and Rob Tappert, his producing partner, and we learned an enormous amount from those guys. So it was really helpful, and it really got us to Freaked.
That's awesome. I want to talk about Freaked for 1 second because it's your feature directorial debut. One of my friends, Bill Zahn, was a makeup artist who actually worked on it, and you had a lot of practical makeup effects. It's a fun movie. You cast Mr. T, which was just genius casting, especially for that script. I could do a whole episode on Freaked. What was your biggest lesson on Freaked that was eye-opening? Obviously, you were in no way a newbie. You were in no way green. You'd managed film sets. You'd been on film sets. But here you were in the director's chair. And I'm just curious, what caught you off guard? What was something that forged your creative habits moving forward from Freaked that you picked up on Freaked?
Really, there was something every day. It was an insanely ambitious film. It was like $11-12 million, for two 25-year-old guys. And yes, we've been shooting for a while, and we did know what we were doing, and we were very, very, very prepared. We were both, I still am, extremely prep oriented, which helps me a lot in my documentaries. But so the whole film was storyboarded and everything was mapped out, and we had a massive set with 3 independent makeup effects teams. I mean, whole teams. It looked like an army with tents everywhere. So it was a trial by fire in many ways, and a really gratifying experience. And I was also playing the lead, so it was hard. But I learned from everyone. Catherine Hardwick was our production designer, who would obviously go on to direct Twilight. She's a genius. I mean, she's literally a creative genius, I think. So we were young and we were open-minded, and we were really soaking up the lessons we could get from everybody. I learned a lot working with Randy Quaid, who was absolutely incredible in that performance. And that was helpful to me directing actors and with my acting. But the biggest lesson was what happened to us in post, because, and it was not uncommon, but Joe Roth, who we made the film for, left and went to a different studio, and the incoming administration just really didn't get the movie. It was really not part of the type of films they wanted to make. It's a very strange movie for a major studio. I could honestly completely understand the sort of sticker shock of like, oh my God, what did these guys do?
What was the budget of it?
It was like $12 million.
Okay.
They're basically a giant Mad Magazine, Big Daddy Roth monster movie. And I think we actually would have done well had we come out. It was, the Trey and Matt were about to break. Tim Burton's stuff was really taking off. It was sort of the beginning of more irreverent, off-kilter humor. But we never got a shot. We got shelved, basically, and had to release the movie really ourselves, almost as an independent theater by theater. And we did incredibly well in that way. We got great reviews. We were playing film festivals, but it taught me a lot about perseverance, honestly. And having been in the business since I was 9 as an actor, it was a real eye-opener for the fact that if you're going to make movies that you care about, you have to have a kind of independent spirit. Meaning, even if you're working with a studio, a part of you still has to assume that you're distributing yourself, you're marketing yourself, and whatever you're getting from them is gravy. And I don't mean that in a cynical way. I just mean if you come at it that way, you're in a much better position to have some guidance over which way your film goes, and also be useful to that studio. So when it connects and you end up with a distributor that is really great and supportive, it's like it's like turbo. You're off to the races. But if there's any weak links in the chain, you have them covered. And that was not something I knew going into Freaked, but I sure as hell knew it coming out of Freaked.
That's good to know. And that's good advice too. You know, and it's bummer because like I can't talk about other big narrative films. You did go to TV. You did fiction on TV as a director. And was there a film that you've been trying to make narrative this whole time before we get into the docs?
No, I mean, I made after Freaked, I wanted to make something small that I wrote. And I made a movie called Fever, which I'm very proud of, which was in the director's fortnight at Cannes with Henry Thomas and Bill Duke and Terry Hatcher. And that got me some of the best reviews I've ever had in my life. And it gave me sort of impetus to just focus on my voice. So of course, there were movies that I wrote that didn't get made. There's always projects that you're working on that don't get made.
Is there a dream project that you've kind of like been holding that you want to maybe revive?
I don't know. I mean, I have a couple that I really liked writing. My approach to writing is pretty mercenary, meaning not in a financial way, but in a creative and artistic way. I don't tend to get too bent out of shape. It's all fertilizer. Like the next thing I write is always better. I've now written probably half a dozen shows for premium cable, none of which have gone to pilot. But honestly, I only started doing that several years ago. So I'm grateful I've sold as many as I have. But every time we write one, we're better. We really are better. And I look back at the earlier ones and go, oh, yeah, I can see why I didn't make it. So to me, it really is a learning process, and it all feeds in together. It feeds into my acting, feeds into my directing. I'm developing a feature project right now on a book that I have optioned that I'm hoping to direct in the next year or two. So I'm developing an independent narrative. I'm also writing.
Are you able to say what book?
Yeah, I've optioned a book by the journalist Barrett Brown called My Glorious Defeats that's coming out soon. Barrett is really brilliant. He's kind of our Hunter S. Thompson. He was the journalist who was imprisoned for exposing corrupt military contracting entities, and he was also one of the front ends of the Anonymous organization. So it's an incredible story. It's like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but with political activists, present day, jail system, political.
Wow. It's
awesome. And it's hilarious because Barrett is an incredibly funny writer, and he won the National Magazine Award from solitary confinement. So he's really, really good at writing.
Awesome.
So he and I are writing that script together to shoot hopefully in the next year or so. And I'm writing a couple of half-hour comedy series to act in. So
that's great.
That's the other narrative thing I'm working on.
That's awesome. You know, getting into your docs, Panama Papers, again, so much material. I could spend more time on it, but I want to get to Zappa because I love Zappa. But I guess the biggest question I have is when you do something like that about a worldwide corruption scheme, did you get interference from the sources that you were kind of reporting on in the movie that made it hard to make the movie? Because I've kind of always wondered that, because there is a danger in that sometimes for documentary filmmakers.
Yeah, look, I don't consider myself a journalist, but I also don't ignore the fact that there are times when my job crosses over into journalism in terms of my approach and how deep I'm going into the field. On the film I made before Panama Papers, Deep Web, I spent several years entrenched in black market internet communities, including the Silk Road, which is what the film is about. And I was, interviewing at-large drug dealers in like dark storage units in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, and by myself, and
it's crazy.
Learning how encryption worked. I mean, I knew how encryption worked, but
don't do that, kids. Don't do that.
Yeah. This is all do as I say, not as I do stuff. But I know my way around encryption and keeping sources protected, and I have a very good infrastructure for all of that, and good lawyers and other protections. So going into Panama Papers, we were actually pretty well prepared for that. I'd made a short film about Barrett Brown, actually, who I'm making the feature with. When he got out of jail, I did that for Laura Poitras's Field of Vision, that incredible platform that Charlotte Cook is at the helm of. And that we rubbed our noses with some dangerous stuff there that taught me more about how to protect myself. So by the time we got to Panama Papers, we were pretty experienced. And yes, we were very careful, and we employed a lot of techniques to stay off the grid making that movie. And someone did die while we were making, not one of ours, thankfully, but someone did get killed during the course of production. So it was no joke, but I was not a journalist. I was not breaking the story. I was making a movie about people who were putting themselves at risk.
Right. I mean, a very cool movie, and congrats on that. Getting to Zappa finally. When I sat down to watch it, I was like, 2 hours and 7 minutes, really? And I was like, I'm glad, because it'll be a good expose on like Zappa's life and stuff like that. By the end of the movie, by 20 minutes in, I'm like, 2 hours is too short. Like, this could have been a 6-hour series. Did you ever consider making it a series? Because like the wealth of footage that you had, because of Zappa keeping such a great archive of his own material, especially his interviews, and having that self-awareness, it was incredible. So did you ever consider it a series rather than a movie?
Not really. I mean, at heart, I'm really a narrative storyteller, and I really generally approach story in a very specific, not necessarily just classical 3-act structure, though. That's certainly something that I care about. But I really look at most of the subjects I approach in a very specific way, and not trying to make an information project or even more dangerously stretch the narrative too thin so it loses its artistic and narrative integrity, which I think happens a lot with doc series. I think there's economics involved. There's a lot more money in doc series. People sometimes they take a story that could easily be told in an hour and a half, and you've got 10 episodes.
Right.
I really didn't want to do that. I really did not want to make the Ken Burns Zappa series. I think someone should do it. I think there's certainly plenty of material there to do.
Yeah.
I really wanted to make a movie about an artist who lived in a specific period of time and what the consequences were for him committing to a life like that. And that's a very narrative-oriented approach. And I did not feel that should be told in more than 2 hours.
Yeah, it was incredible. I mean, obviously your Genesis point, and I have a lot of specific questions about it. So I know this is the very generic question, but how did this start with you getting this, unparalleled access to Zappa's archives and realizing that, let's make a documentary, and getting the family to agree, because he was very also self-conscious about owning his own rights. So most of your music clearances, I'm sure, you were able to get through the family, but then your archival interviews with the different, networks and stuff like that, you would just go through regular licensing.
Yeah. There were no shortcuts. I mean,
right.
It was a monster. It took us 6 years to make. My producer, who's worked with me on several of my films, Glenn Zipper, Glenn and I worked on Deep Web, and we were coming off Deep Web. We were pretty, not fried, but pretty emotionally impacted by the severity of telling that story, and the gravity. Was covering a federal criminal trial. It was very heavy. We wanted to do something that was more culturally oriented, and we were scratching our heads wondering why no one had told the Zappa story. It's an amazing life story. I'm a big fan. I'm drawn to subjects that are almost inherently contradictory, conflicted, paradoxical, dualistic. Those are the protagonists that interest me the most, and that is Zappa in spades. So I'm also very interested in politics, and Zappa was sort of ticked all my boxes of interest in art and all my interests in politics in one human being. So look, I have an independent production company. I just figured out who had the rights. It was Gail. I've known Ahmet for years. I called Ahmet Zappa and I said, "Do you think you could get me a meeting with your mom?" He says, "Sure, but she's going to say no. Just warning you in advance. She always says no." And to be honest with you, I just assumed she was going to say no, so I had absolutely nothing to lose. So I had a meeting with Gail, and I pitched her my take, which is basically what I just told you, which was I had no idea what she'd been pitched. And she just said, two things happened. She had seen Deep Web and really liked it. She liked the politics. She liked the activism. And so we ended up talking about politics for like an hour before we ever got to Frank, and about making art, and about the challenges of making art when the world around you is falling apart, and when do you put down your paintbrush and say, I'm going to get involved. And these are things that are really important to me. And obviously were very important to Frank. But she said that she just didn't get pitched that story. She was always getting pitched the kind of mustachioed, weirdo rock guitar guy from the 70s. And she just didn't, she knew that Frank would not have wanted that to be a primary focus, that it was just such a small part of who he was. So she gave us access to the vault, which was, a blessing and a curse, to be honest with you.
What is the curse? I mean, it's just the mountains of footage, right?
The curse is that when you get, my normal process is if someone says, yes, you can do this thing, even if we're not financed. And at this stage, we were not financed. I have a team. We start researching. We roll up our sleeves. We dive in. We figure out what the story is. That was not going to happen. The vault is vast, and it went all the way back to the 30s, really, because Zappa was saving material from before he was born.
Right.
And it was in mostly in good nick, and then not. So the stuff that was, and unfortunately, the stuff that was deteriorating was the stuff I needed. It was the stuff the family didn't so much need. It was, they'd been doing a really good job preserving masters and audio and all his albums and like every lick of every piece of his compositional work was very well maintained. But, it's extremely expensive to preserve 8mm, Super 8, 16, 35, forms of video that don't have machines to preserve them anymore. It was every conceivable kind of media. And so I looked at it and thought, great, but the movie is now punted years down the road. Like, I'm not making a Zappa movie until I can preserve this stuff. I don't even know how I'm going to pay for it. So that began a 2-year process of just raising the money to preserve the media and then preserving the media, which were two huge jobs unto themselves.
Well, it's going to be important to go into our spoiler section in a minute, but before we do, what was your budget? What would you say that your budget ended up being, if you're able to
for the doc?
Yeah.
Because remember, I didn't have a doc.
No,
budget
I know.
Yeah.
Once you greenlit and you realized
it was a couple $1 million. It was not like, I'm really pretty lean and mean. Like I don't make $6 million docs. Like I'd be happy if someone wanted to give that to me. I'm not even sure I'd know what to do with it. I have a very stripped down team. I'm very cost conscious. I'm very producer oriented, having come up as an independent. So it's an epic movie, and we had editorial going for years. So that's
you would have to. I mean, your editing was out of this world.
It's Mike Nichols. I mean, I'm sure as hell not taking credit for that. I mean, I was obviously supervising, but Mike is really brilliant.
It made the movie beyond digestible by taking the concept of not really MTV because it existed before MTV, but really the concept of making a musical documentary that was still giving you digestible information, but at the same time having the entertainment value that people would expect, more importantly from Frank Zappa, with the kind of skittish, always cutting away to something else, always having like a pop culture or old sci-fi movie reference, which you guys used footage of. It was incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, he did an amazing job, and it was very hard. I mean, my hat is continually off to him because when you preserve a vault like that, when you're the one at the front end, no one has come before you to organize any of it. So basically, the vault material, I like to say, was like a puzzle of infinite pieces that had basically been jammed into a cannon and blown into our edit bay. And we had to piece it together. So every piece of that archival was usually broken into pieces that we had to find with non-matching audio or no audio. And that was just years and years of labor to build that.
How many people did you have to go through the archive? Did you hire archivists?
I have a team, and we basically, the way a doc team often works, which is what I like about this, Jade Allen, Eileen Kwan, Devorah DeVries, my team, Jane Kennedy, my incredible researcher, Kieran, we had the trooper team. Basically, everyone just rolled up their sleeves and got into and became experts in archival preservation. We were doing a little of the work ourselves. I was baking actual tapes at my office for moisture reduction, but all of it was going out to really high-end proprietary preservation companies, and then we were managing that stuff as it came back. On the Zappa side, Joe Travers, who's the vault meister, who knows the vault better than anyone, and Jay Warner, also huge aficionado. We were all working like a multi-headed hydra. And then I built a proprietary sort of a FileMaker Pro application that was our own, that we sort of created from the ground up. We would then log all of it, and then we would keyword it. So meantime, Mike and I were just watching all of it.
Right. Because I mean, I saw tons of 3/4-inch tapes and beta tapes. You would have to get those machines just to even get into what those tapes were.
Correct.
And then, loggers for documentaries often have, transcribers who are taking bits of dialogue so they could be searched later. Were you doing something that extensive as well?
We were doing transcriptions and keyword search, and we were doing a visual search. So we had like a transcription unit that was going through, and then obviously we got into the interviews. But I wasn't transcribing all of the vault because that would have been, we wouldn't have had time.
Right,
I mean,
right.
or all the money in the world would never. It's over 1,000 hours of media. So
And how many hours would you say that you dealt with for the documentary? And then I'm going to give the spoiler alert because we got to get
hundreds and hundreds. I mean,
Okay.
we watched an enormous amount of footage, and then we scanned an enormous amount of footage. There's nothing there that we don't know what it is. There's no box that we haven't seen at this
Right.
point. We just didn't watch all of it in real time.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You know, our new issue is just ready to come out. We are working so hard around the clock to make sure it's coming out this holiday season. And we've got a lot of really cool things in it that I know you're going to enjoy. Even after it's published, we're going to actually keep updating it with new articles that are just going to slide right into the magazine. We're digital. We could do that. You can read us at backstory.net or through our iPad app, Backstory. If you've never read us before, check out our free issue in there, and hopefully that'll make you want to subscribe. And if you do want to subscribe, and we hope you do, you could use coupon code SAVE5 over at backstory.net, and that'll save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. You'll also get access to our archive, which we're continuing to expand. We're on issue 42 now. Our archive currently goes back to around issue 29 or 30, but we're adding new older issues. It's just a tedious process. Our archive was zapped earlier in the year, and we have to add back issues one article at a time for each issue. And really tedious and very hard to do while we're producing new content. So look, it would really mean a lot for me to have your support. I've enjoyed your support as podcast listeners for years. If you're able to, we'd love to have you as a subscriber, and you could use code SAVE5 during checkout at backstory.net to save $5 off a subscription. But now, without any further ado, thank you for considering giving Backstory a chance. I hope you go watch Zappa. It's available right now wherever you're used to watching movies on demand. You could rent it. I know you'll enjoy Zappa. And speaking of Zappa, we're going to get right back into our conversation with writer-director Alex Winter. Okay, well, so spoiler alert, because we've got to talk about the spoilers for a couple minutes here. If you have not yet seen Zappa, press pause. Go watch it. You can find it anywhere you can get VOD, your usual places. It is highly worth your time. It is a hell of an artistic accomplishment. Come back and finish the rest of the interview. I don't know how we went this long. For anybody that doesn't know, we are now into the spoilers. Frank Zappa passed away in 1995. So in case
93.
anybody doesn't,
93.
Oh, did I say that? Sorry.
Yeah.
93. Frank Zappa passed away in 1993. For anybody that doesn't know, you tell that in the beginning of the movie. And what was so interesting was that he kept such great archives that you really were able to get a sense of who he was, even though you couldn't interview him. And so that's what really blew my mind about this. In addition to the great archival interviews that you searched up, like that's first and foremost something that I got to congratulate you on, because I wasn't really expecting it, because a lot of documentaries about, especially deceased music stars, they're guarded generally in some of their interviews that they do on television. You don't get the insight. But even as Frank is talking about his own mortality after he's been diagnosed with prostate cancer, and they're doing those interviews at his house, there's a sensibility and sensitivity that he's offering up his fans in the world that I was very surprised that you got out of it. And so kudos to you on that. Tell us how you adapted your structure, though, because documentaries like this would obviously have a cradle to grave feel the same way a biopic would. But you made yours nonlinear, in which you were going back and forth. You were showing the early iterations of his career, his frustrations as an artist, then his awakening that he can't keep banging his head against the wall and he needs to continue growing it as an artist for the last part of his life, which blew me away, which was the composing, which he had been doing all of his life. But that was something that I totally didn't expect you to be able to get into this, and you dove head into it. So tell us how you found that structure, how many years of watching the footage it took you to find that structure.
Well, I've got to tell you that a lot of that structure was written before we even started the vault work. That was kind of my thesis. I had a script that I had written that took you through the narrative of his life. First act, end of first act, second act, midpoint, crisis point, all of that. It was written like a film script. Obviously, it changed.
How many pages was it? This is awesome.
Like 60.
That's great.
Yeah. And that was for me. So that gave me something that Mike and I could discuss, that I could then work on my own and reorient. Then there were theme points. Then there were stories. There were changes. There were some core things I discovered when I was researching Frank that I really believed were his touchstone life points that hadn't really been focused on before. That was actually reinforced by Frank himself when we found out all that archival of him talking. And if it hadn't been, I would have changed the structure. I didn't care. I didn't need it to be my story. But I had a feeling that the prison experience for him in his youth had really impacted him in terms of how he viewed the outside world and what committed him to living the life that he did, to hell with everything, and whatever comes his way as a result, he was ready to take that on, which was a huge gambit because he faced a lot of consequences for that decision. So there were things that changed, and then there were things that stayed the same, but there was a lot of themes that we got out of the material that caused us to bend one way or the other. And the whole third act being, since we're past the spoiler zone, the whole third act being focused on the denouement of his cancer diagnosis. I got that out of the vault. Once I realized there was all this intimate footage of him just in dealing with his own mortality, I was like, we got to spend many, many, many minutes just on that.
I mean, it was such a great third act. I really did not expect it to go there, and it really took me. One of the things that I was curious about, just what was something that you found in the archive that was a part of your original design that you just couldn't fit, but that you loved, that would be fascinating for people to hear about? Because you had such a wealth of material. I mean, I could have seen you doing more on Valley Girl, of course, his #1 hit. I was glad you didn't dive too deep because you went into better directions. But what's the thing that like you would put on a DVD extra, or you would add another 30 or 40 minutes to?
Honestly, I'm such a stickler for getting out while the getting's good. There's no part of me that wants a longer version of this. There's lots of great, of course. There's lots of great stuff. I mean, there's like fun. We have DVD extras that Mike and I have cut. There's, funnily enough, a lot of interview footage of the present day interviews that I really love. There's great stories that we didn't get to put in because they didn't really drive the narrative forward, or they didn't really speak to really important aspects of his interior life. But they're just great moments from these people who I really cared about. Those are going on DVD extras. Those we're going to show people. Some of the really more whimsical vault finds are going on as extras.
Okay, that's awesome. Because the 200 Motels stuff that you put, the behind the scenes shooting his film 200 Motels, that was crazy. I didn't expect to see that. That was actually really fun. Who threw him off the stage and why? You mentioned that incident, and I didn't realize that it knocked him out for a year, which again was a reset point for him. Was there ever a reason, or was it just a deranged fan?
No, we knew. It's out there in the sort of webosphere, but it was a disgruntled boyfriend, a jealous boyfriend of a girl who may or may not have had a momentary dalliance with Frank. Okay. So it was a revenge. A lot of people think that he was just crazy and that there was no dalliance. That we don't know. It's a little complicated, but we do know why. We do know what the motivation was.
I was just curious on that. The thing that I was so grateful that you did was that you had an interview with Bickford about his amazing stop motion animations that are featured in the film. People, once they see your film, if they're not familiar with Bickford's work, are going to want to see more of it. What's a favorite place you could tell people to go to find it? Because it's just
there's a great documentary that Frank himself made called The Amazing Mr. Bickford, which is on video, which is dives into Bickford land. Obviously, they should watch Baby Snakes, which is filled with his work, which is out there. We actually preserved the neg for that in the vault, which I'm really happy about. Yeah.
It was just beautiful. I mean, I wanted even more footage. I know that Frank had made that documentary. I've never seen it. And
it's really
actually
good.
makes me want to go watch it.
Yeah, but all the claymation in our film is claymation that even Bruce hadn't seen. Meaning, obviously, he made it.
Right.
But it had never gotten out of Frank's vault, so he never saw it done. So we used almost all of the claymation we used in the film is previously unseen.
Yeah. I mean, there's many tragedies in the film. Obviously, Frank passing too early, and I know we're starting to run out of time, so I'm going to rush through this, but it was so great that you showed him right at the forefront of the digital revolution for home recording. You have the computer there. They're playing Tapper, the 80s video game Tapper. Yeah. The kids are playing it, which was awesome. I still love that game. And one could only imagine the type of composing that he would have done as the 90s progressed and, the in-home studio became a reality that was that was affordable. I'm curious, when you got into that stuff, did you get some of the equipment? Was that like still in the archive? Like some of the weird equipment that he had in the video that you showed? I didn't write down the name of that damn machine that he was using, but like
the synclavier.
Yeah,
he has a synclavier. Yeah, I mean, he doesn't have all of it isn't down there, and there's patches that are missing, but there's a good amount of it there. The piano with the extra octave was there. He had a hoop that he had attached microphones all the way around to do experiments with surround sound. That was in the rehearsal space. Look, he was always extremely innovative, and he saw the digital revolution coming in like 1988, 89. In fact, he was very protective in his will about making sure that digital was protected. He was more concerned about digital than he was almost the physical when he was on the way out from cancer. So he was a very prescient, but not a Luddite. Like, he embraced technology, but he was also clear-eyed about it. And I relate to him very much that way. I feel very similarly. I feel I'm often defending technology, even though myself, I know there's a lot of problems because everyone tends to be so knee-jerk against it.
I loved that, you sat down with Kronos Quartet to talk about his experience with them, and that you dove head into the composing, and you showed the German concert at the end, which was absolutely beautiful. And you're running a lot of the score throughout. I'm curious if we could expect more of those kind of things being released. Some of those scores that because I know that so many things have been released after his death, but it wasn't clear to me what you were showing for the first time from the archive or what's actually out there.
Well, Kronos, obviously, we did for the film. There's never been a performance of none of the above. Black Page with Ruth and Joe we did for the film. I'm not inside the Zappa Trust, so I don't know what they're going to do, and I don't know what they've got.
How available is the Ensemble Modern concert that you showed?
Very. It's the Yellow Shark performance. Is one of his great. It was one of the things that got me into Zappa. It was released in '93, I believe, and it's absolutely amazing.
I'd never seen it, and I love.
Yeah, you can watch most of that concert on YouTube. Though I went and got masters and shots that aren't in the YouTube stuff, and that's what we use for the film. But it's extraordinary. I will say there's a lot of compositional work of his that's never been recorded by anybody.
Yeah, that's the wild part.
So we found flat files of literally there's tons of music that he composed. He could never find anyone to play it.
I mean, that's the hope, because there's that Bernard Herrmann score from a Hitchcock movie that was thrown out when they had their big argument, and then years later people went and recorded it. I think it was from Torn Curtain. And
he had a synclavier. Now Zappa had I found this. The family didn't know it existed. He had a synclavier score for Cronenberg's movie The Fly, which is absolutely phenomenal. Whoa. But not movie score. It's kind of dystopian, dissonant classical music, but he's sampling fly sounds. Cronenberg apparently didn't know that he did this. I researched it once I found it. Got a hold of Howard Shore, and I was like, what's going on with this? But no one had any idea.
Well, so, look, there's so much to talk about. I know we're running out of time.
Yeah.
The editing is absolutely amazing. I cannot believe how kinetic it was. Two last questions. What was your biggest lesson in editing such a beast like this, where you kept things going and had so much footage to choose from? And the other question is, what was your toughest scene? The scene that, as a filmmaker, you had to keep returning to because just something wasn't right. And then how did you creatively solve that problem?
I would say that the editing was, I knew I wanted an aggressive style. I knew that Mike could pull it off. I was a big fan of his previous work. So as a director, giving him the freedom to just do his thing, knowing we'd have plenty of time for both of us to perfect it, reshape it, whatever, make sure that thematics worked. So it wasn't a gamble so much, but I knew that I knew that it was worth. I took the risk of alienating some either fans or even audience members by doing something I knew that was aggressive. I'm grateful that the film has gone over as well as it has. I wasn't sure, to be honest with you, whether that would put people off. And that's actually leads to your second question, because the toughest part was Act 1 for us, because I was really committed to a hyper-aggressive, almost atonal first 10 or 15 or so minutes. I didn't want any talking heads at all for a while. In fact, there's no one comes in until after the half-hour mark, I think. It's all either Zappa or just craziness. And I really wanted it to feel like Zappa was speaking to you for at least the first 20 minutes. And Mike did this. He did this amazing thing. We have this amazing 20-minute version of that. It took us a really long time to shorten that to something that was as aggressive as we wanted, but didn't completely alienate everyone in the audience. And getting that just right for us, where we really felt this is about as far out as you can get without it really starting to lose people. And for us, it wasn't shock value. Like, it really was supposed to be story. Like, it really was supposed to tell a story. It wasn't supposed to just be weirdness for its own sake. So making that work that took us a long time. And sometimes we put it down and come back to it like half a year later and work on it again.
And how many years would you say editing was?
It's a blur. I mean, it
was a 6-year project.
I guess 3 years of that was editorial.
3?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Look, I absolutely loved your movie. It took me to places that I had no idea existed about Zappa. You really covered a lot in there, and you made it digestible and entertaining. And I cannot give you more kudos than that, sir. Like, congrats on a job well done. I hope to have you back, because I would love to talk to you more about your screenwriting as well. And this, especially your design document for a documentary. So maybe we'll do another episode at some point, but congrats on Zappa and on a job well done.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, it was great to do it.
Thanks, man. Have a good day.
Awesome.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to writer-director Alex Winter for being so generous with his time and coming over to chat about his latest film, Zappa. Again, I absolutely love this film. There is so much to learn about editing, about filmmaking, the creative process, and just seeing Zappa's creative process was awesome. And of course, Alex and his team really put the time in to make this film special, so make sure to see it. Go see Zappa. Of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net, or you could find us in our iPad app. If you've never read us before, we hope you'll read our free issue, which you could do. And after reading it, we hope you'll realize how great we are and that you'll want to subscribe. And if you do want to subscribe, you could use code SAVE5. That will save you $5 off a subscription, which you can only use at backstory.net, but your login credentials there will work on our iPad app as well. So you'll be able to get both, but you'll be subscribing at backstory.net. And look, our issue 42 is getting ready to come out. We have so many cool things in it. It's something that I think is a great quarantine read, especially the cool screenplays that we're publishing in their entirety, along with interviews with the writers as well. But we also have our usual interviews of filmmakers and TV showrunners and comic book artists and everybody else. So there's a lot to explore in Backstory Magazine. Your support as a podcast listener means everything to me. So thanks for considering subscribing to Backstory Magazine. If you want to find me on social media, you can find me as Yo Goldsmith on Twitter or Backstory_mag on Twitter. And we have those same accounts in Instagram as well. And I'm trying to make a goal of using Instagram more this year. And I know I mostly tweet. Those are the two places to reach me. I also have a Facebook fan page set up, and I rarely go there, but that would be the other place to reach me. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2020. All rights reserved. I'm Jeff Goldsmith. I'm the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.